Hey y'all, time for 300B Tube Shootout 2.0. And this time, the contenders are, we've got our EML solid plate 300B tubes. Some of these are a repeat from the first one, but I'm doing a full test on these too. I can't remember if I did the audio analyzer suite on the last ones or not, but anyway. Got the Summit PSVANE tubes 300B. Got the Gold Lion PX300B. We got our Shootout black coated Treasure 300B tubes. And then this time we've got some JJ 300B tubes. And for every test, we're using the Summit 6S and 7 driver tubes. And I've really found that, honestly, I think they're some of the best 6S and 7 tubes I've ever listened to. I mean, I've got the old tall bottle, Sylvanias. I've got just dozens of 6S and 7 tubes that I've rolled through amps and listened to. And especially in this amp with this Cascode circuit, these Summit tubes are just, they have the best performance as far as THD versus noise and power and all that stuff. They don't break up when they get driven hard, and they've really got just a huge sound stage just as far as width and depth. But anyway, let's run all these tubes through the audio analyzer suite test. And go ahead and spoiler here, these mesh plate tubes, these Shootout tubes that have these, or they're not really mesh plate, they're punch plate tubes. They did not like this higher power amp. On this version, the B plus is about 50 volts higher than on my previous versions, which pushes the tubes to about 90%, and we get just right at 10 watts before it starts clipping, and a solid 9 watts under, at reasonable distortion levels. These tubes did not like it. The distortion was just too high. I could tell that the tube was getting stressed out, and not surprising with their punch plates, that they look like mesh, but they're not actually mesh. They're, like I said, they're punch plate. They didn't like this higher dissipation, so didn't run them long. I could quickly see that they were under distress. They worked fine on the lower voltage earlier models of my 300B, the 8 watt amp that had, I think, 350 volts across the tube or 360, but the extra 50 volts they didn't like. So anyway, they're not going to be on the test. The rest of these are. So we'll do the objective testing, and then at the end I'm going to give my subjective impressions of all of these tubes. Okay, so first tubes we're going to test are the PSVANE Summit 300B tubes, and we're using the PSVANE Summit 6SN7 with all the different tubes, as they're honestly one of the best sounding 6SN7 and best testing that I've run across. And yeah, I know they're not cheap, but they are really good. So we're going to keep them as the constant, and we're going to use the same Made in Japan 504 rectifier tube. And just so you know, this is the Skunky 300B that uses the full ISO iron. I'll put the link in the description. Anyway, let's test some 300B tubes. And you can see that we've got really nice performance. This is a single-ended amp with 0 negative feedback. So anything that happens in the amp shows up on the output. And as you can see here at 8 watts, which is kind of the standard for a 300B amp, we're just under 2% distortion. And yeah, it's doing really nice. And then we actually have 9 watts at slightly higher distortion, and the amp doesn't start clipping till about 10 watts. So this is what we've got. Let me just kind of scroll through this slowly. you can see the numbers on the upper right as we go through this, and I'll do this on each tube so you can kind of get a feel for what the tube's doing at the different power levels. There we go. Now let's look at the frequency response. And this is 1 dB up, 1 dB down. So that's 1 dB, that's 1 dB. And this range here, like if we're scrolling along in this area around in here, if you look at the numbers on the upper right, let's go with the blue ones, since these mirror each other. That's basically 0 dB. That's, 0. Was it 0.3? There's like 0 dB is right around in this area. So you can see when we get down here at 20 hertz, we're down 0.15 dBs. And then the peak here is up about 0.05 dB maybe. And in this little range along in here, it's 0.06 dB, so we're like 1/10 of a dB from here to here. And I'm zoomed in this tight, trying to see if I can measure what I'm hearing subjectively. And then here's our THD versus frequency. And you can see here that by, 24 hertz, we're at 1% THD. Down at 20, we're 2.5. But from 25 hertz up, the THD versus frequency is flat. And it goes up a little bit here at the end, maybe 0.5%. That's just kind of normal. I've seen that on a lot of amps, so not concerned with that. The other thing is, if you look at the second order harmonic distortion, it pretty much parallels the total distortion, and it dips just slightly. And then when we go to the third order, it's way down here. Almost all this low frequency distortion is second order. And honestly, across the board, most of it is second order harmonic distortion, which is why we listen to tube amps. So, yeah, this is all good stuff. And this is being done at 4 watts. So the next tube we're testing is the EML, or the Emission Labs standard solid plate 300B tube. And it looks like this is a very similar performance. Might have a little more distortion in this 4 watt area, but it actually stays lower, and we're under 2% distortion at 9 watts, and even out here at almost 10 watts, we're just over 2.5% distortion. So again, some really good performance out of a 300B tube. And like, we'll just do that same kind of slow sweep here across the range, and you can look at the numbers in the upper right hand corner, and that's kind of showing you the the power versus the THD. There's 1 watt, and there's 3 watts, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, go over here to our frequency response. Looks very similar to the PSVANE tube. Might be a little more roll off on the bottom end here, down here at 20 hertz, but that's way down there. And we're talking about like 0.1 dB. If you go by the blue numbers, that's what, I mean, the 2 channels are a little different, but the self-calibration is happening on this blue channel. As you can see, there's 0 dB right in there, and that's around 2K. And down here at 1K, we're down like 0.04 dB, which is almost nothing. And the same thing here, the spread is about a little over 0.5 dB from the highest to the lowest in the frequency range that we're concerned with. And then again, this is 1 dB up, 1 dB down. So that's a really tight range. So it exaggerates what you're seeing here on the screen. And then if we go to THD versus frequency, same kind of deal. When you get down to 24-ish hertz, we're at 1%. And then it does a little dip right in here with this tube, which is a bonus, I would say. And then overall, it's got maybe a little more THD than the PSVANE tube at the same 4-watt power level. And they both have this little zigzaggy thing up here over 10K, which is what it is. We look at the second order harmonic on this, you can see it's like probably 90% of the distortion. And when we go to third order on this tube, it drops way down here, especially down in this low frequency range. And so mostly second order harmonic distortion, which is the good stuff, and it's why we build a 300B amp to start with. So let's swap in another tube. Okay, so here we have the JJ300B tubes, and looking at this, it's very similar. And then up here on the top end, we've got 9 watts at under 2% distortion. I mean, that all looks good. We go to the frequency response. Oh, and let me just sweep through this slowly like I did on these other ones, so you can look and compare them all. We'll look at the frequency response, and this one's got a kind of a little bump down here on the bottom, and this is more of an angle than we saw before. And then 2K, we got 0. So again, on this end, we got 0.1 dBs, and then up here, we've got 0.06. So maybe a little more variation in the frequency response on these than we saw on some of the other tubes. And then finally on our THD versus frequency, you can see at 4 watts we do have a little more THD here. And then let's see what the second versus the third is. Same pattern. It's got more second than third order harmonic distortion, which is the good stuff. So yeah, that's it for that tube. We got one left. We're going to pop some Gold Lion PX300B is the model number. And we're going to pop a couple of those in. So let me get those warmed up and we'll run that test. So the last one we're going to be looking at are these Gold Lion 300B tubes. And as you can see, these actually have pretty low distortion through this whole range here. And these are all at 1 kilohertz, just so you know. See, we got 4 watts at under 1% distortion. And one thing I noticed here is one of these was ahead of the other one. So even though these were boxes, a matched pair, and the numbers on them that they use to rate them with are the same, they're clearly not a matched pair. And you can see that more obviously here on the frequency response. You can see that between the two tubes there's about a half dB volume difference, which half dB is not a ton, but that's still something. And when we look at, again, if we go by where this is zeroed out on the blue scale, is at 4K. When we come down here to 20 hertz with these tubes, we're down about 0.2 dBs. And then like the others, it rolls off on the top end, which the only real difference here is right here in this mid-range looks different. And so finally we got our THD versus frequency, and these tubes have more distortion down at 20 hertz than any of the other tubes we tested. This was at 20 hertz, we got 3%, and when the other ones were down at 1% by this little area right in here, we're still at 1.5% distortion. So in this super low frequency range, there is more distortion. And then this looks pretty normal. I will say, when testing these tubes, see these little spikes here? I ran some of these other tests 2 or 3 times, because even on like this frequency response test, I would get like a spike jump right up in here. And then I'd run it again and it was gone. And none of the other tubes did that. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that. But then here's something that's not great. If we look at the second order harmonic distortion, look how far that jumps down compared to the other tubes we looked at. And then it's actually got more third order harmonic distortion than second order. And we want this second order harmonic distortion, and when you put these gold lion tubes in it, it pretty much negates that feature of a single-ended direct heated triode amp. So anyway, this looks like a good place to wrap this up. Okay, now that we've done all the objective testing, I know you want to know, what do they sound like? So I'm going to start at the bottom. And again, it's these gold lion tubes. Just, I'm not impressed at all. They really sound thin. They have, the mid-range is really weak. I mean, they've got the basses there, the really top end, you know, the top ends there. But in the middle, where a direct heated triode usually just shines, it's just sucked out. And just is not enjoyable to listen to. Maybe in a different amp, maybe with a different operating point, you know. And again, these are 400 volts across the tube at 80 milliamps is where these are being run. So take that into consideration. They're being run at about 90% or 32 watts. But I didn't like them in my other amp either. I didn't like them in that Bowie Range A50. They might be a little better than the bottom tier PSVANE tubes or whatever those are that come in those, you know, or the Wilsonton branded tubes in the R300, those kind of tubes. They might be better than that a little. They might just be a little more detailed, but they're not lifelike, and they're not just, I don't know. I just didn't like them at all. So bottom tier, would not recommend getting these tubes unless you're just got a really budget 300B amp. I mean, these would probably be okay for that, but they're not very good tubes. So next, and actually, I'm going to start from the top down so I can tell you what these other tubes don't have that these Summit tubes have. And to me, the winner in this amp were these PSVANE Summit tubes. And they have just really great frequency response across the whole range. The mid-range and especially the lower mids are really punchy, and there's no smearing. Some people might feel they're a little too detailed, which could be toned down pairing them with some different driver tubes, because these are pretty detailed driver tubes as well. But I was using a Billie Holiday, I'll put the link up here of the album that I was using in the song, and I'll put it in the description too. But it starts off with her singing, and with these tubes, like she's like front and center on the sound stage. I mean, and it's so three-dimensional. And then, like, halfway back on the right side, you hear this piano come in, or a guitar. One of the two. I can't remember this. Sorry, but it's a string instrument comes in and over here on the right side, and the sound is coming like 2 feet to the right of the speaker. I mean, it's crazy how wide the soundstage is. And then on the left, this muted horn comes in, and the soundstage is so deep, or the imaging so deep, it almost sounds like he's playing out my carport. I mean, like on the other side of the wall. It's crazy. But it really sounds like you're there. And this is one of the best sounding amps, tube combinations I've ever heard. And I hate that I'm selling this to somebody, because now I'm going to have to build one for myself with all this, just whole kit. There's something magic going on with this combination. And so I'm going to definitely recommend that the owner buy a set of these tubes, because, and I'm not selling mine because these sound too good, but so we've got that. So when I put the EML tubes in it, the tonality was very similar. If anything, the mid-range was a little richer than these, and the sound stage was as wide, but it wasn't as deep. Like when she was singing and the guitar or piano starts playing, they sounded like they were like the same distance from me. And then when this muted trumpet starts doing its thing, it sounded, it was way past the speaker too on the soundstage, but it wasn't like back. These tubes were missing that forward and back imaging. And they're not bad at all. And it could be, the speakers or my room setup and stuff is impacting some of this imaging stuff that I'm hearing. So I'm not saying that these are bad tubes by any stretch, but in my room with this amp, with my speakers, I would pick these Summit tubes to listen to. And if you've got the money, it might be worth owning both and just see which ones you like better. Could be with some different music that these would sound better, and I'm glad I own both. So that's the two top tier. And again, I think in the last one, they may have had the positions reversed, but this time the Summit tubes came on top. And it could be that these Summit tubes have more time on them now, because they've got probably 100 hours of time on them now, and they may be just really coming into their own. So those are the two top ones. So that's the EML solid plate 300Bs and the Summit tubes. Now there's another option. They have a 300B XLS. They just came out with this 300B XLS mesh plate that would run in this amp. And they're about a $400 premium over either one of these tubes, but they're a true mesh plate tube that could sound very interesting. So that's another option that I don't know what they're going to sound like, and that's kind of in the future, but I'm going to be playing with those at some point. And just so you know too, all these tubes I bought, these aren't like tubes given to me, at least this set. These were tubes that I bought off Amazon. So, or these came from Tubes USA. These I bought secondhand from a guy that I did a modification on a R3. No, was it R300? Yeah, it was an R300. And it was the one I put the ISO transformers on that fixed the goofy dip in it. And he put Western Electric tubes in it, which I wasn't real crazy about what they sounded like either. Maybe at some point I'll get a pair of those in here. But anyway, the last ones are the JJ tubes. And to me, they're just barely a step above these Gold Lions. The imaging was the main thing, besides that they didn't have any detail and they sounded really smeared and mushy and kind of thick and syrupy. But the soundstage just collapsed, and it was like, instead of the band being out here and the sound coming from outside the speakers and the whole, it just like came into like the center, and everybody was all grouped together in a little clump in the middle. And I have no idea what's doing that, but I would not put those tubes in an amp that I cared about either, unless it was just a really budget one and you just wanted a 300B tube in an amp. Not impressed. And these were sent to me by a viewer, which, thank you for sending them to me, and I'll get with you an email, get your address, and box them up and send them back to you. But yeah, not just, yeah, and I know the price on them is really good. I would buy the Horizon 300Bs before I bought those, or these. But honestly, the Horizon 300Bs just aren't in this league with these tubes at all. I mean, they're definitely like between these and this and this. And like, anyway, I think y'all hopefully understand that. I know it's kind of confusing. I spent all day swapping tubes, listening to the same track over and over, trying to really not get sucked in. Honestly, I wanted these to sound the best. So if there's any expectation bias, it was that these EML tubes were going to sound the best. But I'm just, these Summit tubes have just sold me on them. They just really sound great. So anyway, I hope that's helpful to you guys that are running a 300B amp. And again, your amp may have a different front end. You might have a different experience. And it may be that these JJ tubes sound better than these, but I really doubt it. And I like JJ tubes. I mean, the JJ EL34Ls are what I use in my EL34 amp, but I've tried a dozen EL34 tubes, and they're the best sounding EL34 tubes I've heard. And their driver tubes are great. Their rectifier tubes are horrible. And honestly, now I can say their 300B tubes aren't much better than their rectifier tube, except they're probably reliable. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters and other folks that support the channel in various ways. I had somebody email me saying, are you still in business? Yes, I'm still. I mean, I know I kind of got all pissy about the tariffs and said I wasn't going to build any more amps, and that lasted about a week, and I got over it. And I had to raise my prices. And so I didn't want to have to do that. That's kind of what pissed me off. But then it was like, this is not my fault. And if I'm going to keep building amps, I've got to just pass those costs on to the folks buying my amps. And so unfortunately, everything went up a little bit. But anyway, so yes, I'm still building amps. I'm been kind of slow this year, getting off going, and had some medical issues and stuff, but I'm back to building stuff. And next I'm going to be building a pair of 300B mono blocks that I've been promising a guy for over a year. He's been super patient. Hey, but at least it's not 3 years, right? So anyway, we're going to get working on that and doing some other fun stuff. So stick around, subscribe to the channel if you love this content, and until the next video, have a nice day.